Evening, maybe, if somebody is joining from Asia Pacific. I am Adriana Radulovic. I'm the Executive Secretary of GeoBon, and I welcome all of you to this webinar. Good to see some known faces among you, and welcome to all those that we do not know yet. And we are very excited to see that so many of you are interested in learning what has happened with Bond in a Box, with this platform that has been developed for a few years, and now with refreshed funding from Microsoft and with heavy involvement from Humboldt Institute and the Quebec Center for Biodiversity Sciences, we've been working on this for the last 2 years since the Secretariat of GeoBon moved to Montreal. Before I will pass on to my colleagues who actually did the work on this, Jean-Michel Lord, who's our developer and Scrum Master, and Katie Millett, who's our science officer, just a few housekeeping information. This presentation will be around 45 minutes. It will be spiced with a Mentimeter, with a video, with a live demo of the tools. So hopefully, you will find this time passing a bit faster than just watching slides. Please keep your questions for the end, because after this we will have a Q&A session from, well, my time, 9:45 to 10:30. If you would like to put the questions in the chat as we go, please go ahead. I will keep an eye on the chat. And we hope to have a lively discussion after this. As you probably noticed, the webinar is being recorded and is going to be shared with you after that. And we will share also a short report based on the questions and the discussion that has started here. And if you have colleagues, if you know of other people that would like to hear more about Bond in a Box, please tell them to join our evening session, which will be today at 8 p.m. Montreal time. And with this, I will pass on to Katie Millett.
Thanks, Adriana. If you could just advance the slide. Okay, so welcome everyone. On the screen, you'll see the topics that we'll be covering today. So first, we're going to discover our audience. Like Adriana said, we're going to use Mentimeter for that. Then we'll get into Bond in a Box. So why Bond in a Box, its needs and motivations, why it became necessary, we felt, what it can and cannot do, ways that you can engage in the future as a contributor, a user, or both, of course. And lastly, the next steps going forward for Bond in a Box. So I think the first thing we'll do is we'll use Mentimeter. So if you go to menti.com and enter the code there, or if you just follow the link that Adriana put in the chat, that will take you to our poll where we're interested in knowing what type of stakeholder you are. The options are academic, government, international organization, private sector, industry, or other. So once you do that, please come back to the Zoom. I'll give you about 2 minutes, maybe not even. And for some people that are just joining, we're just taking a quick poll on what type of stakeholder you are. If you are academic, government, international organization, private sector, industry, or other. So please select one and come back. Okay, so it looks like we have a fair bit of academics, if everyone can see the results. Mostly academics and other. I'm curious to know what these other categories are. If you want to put that in the chat or something, that would help us out. Sorry, there's some more people coming in. Okay, so as you can see, we have some people coming in. So I'll stop sharing now. If Jean-Michel, if you want to give back the slide. So even though we're from these diverse sectors, I think what we can all agree on is that we're all linked by the common understanding and need that we have a biodiversity crisis. And a lot of us are in different fields of biodiversity, but all of us are using biodiversity data or needing biodiversity data. Either we collect it and report on this raw biodiversity data, we analyze it and put it in reports, or we give it to policymakers to guide their decisions. So all of us are interested in knowing how biodiversity is changing and making this information usable and having a strong impact. Next slide, please. So in addition to our collective concern for the biodiversity crisis, is that our collective imperative as biodiversity scientists and policymakers is to engage in biodiversity monitoring. So we might be familiar with this global perspective where we have conservation action taking place across the world across all facets of biodiversity, from genes to ecosystem services, and attributing changes in biodiversity change to particular drivers of biodiversity loss. And then this is going into international policy and reports like IFES and all the way to the Convention on Biological Diversity. But we at GeoBon, what we are interested in doing is improving this at the national level. So according to the CBD decision, CBD decision 15/5, which is the monitoring framework in paragraph 7, GeoBon, in addition to other international organizations, is invited by the COP to help parties support their biodiversity monitoring needs. So as a biodiversity monitoring network, this is what we're doing, given this mandate. So next slide, Jean-Michel. So GeoBon, over the course of its entire founding and establishment till now, has helped to help policymakers engage in biodiversity monitoring. And now that we have the monitoring framework, a part of the GBF, or the Global Biodiversity Framework, a significant part of our activity is contributing to the monitoring framework and helping parties with their urgent need for global coordination and biodiversity monitoring. We're also interested to help parties achieve the goals of the GBF and make sure that their targets and progress towards these targets and goals has information that is readily updatable and helping them understand the progress that they're making and whether they should update their national biodiversity strategies and action plans. And lastly, we're helping countries because they need data and processing capacities in place to produce the indicators and report progress as needed in the monitoring framework and the GBF. So our overall objective today, and what BonnerBox will do and does, and will have a life outside of the GBF, but mostly it is to support parties with their biodiversity monitoring needs under the monitoring framework of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So over the last decade, GeoBon has engaged in two major realms. The first is establishing biodiversity observation networks, or BONs. And these are national, regional, and thematic networks endorsed by GeoBon that cover aquatic and terrestrial systems. So GeoBon itself consists of a network of over 2,600 registered members from 139 countries and over 1,500 institutions across the world. Our experts work on different facets of biodiversity, from genes to ecosystems, and across different types of areas and themes. So as you can see in this map, we see that we have a large Arctic BON that covers the northern hemisphere of the planet. We have individual national BONs in Colombia, France, 2 in China. And we have an Asia Pacific BON that covers the region of the Asia Pacific. And in addition to these national and sort of regional levels, we have thematic bonds that consist of the soil bond, the marine bond, and freshwater bond. And of course, the Europa bond, which is very large. Next slide, please. So the second, how a bond or a biodiversity observation network is built is through this process of, through engagement with stakeholders interested in biodiversity change, assessing their needs and what they are capable of doing or need assistance in doing, helping them design where best to place a biodiversity observation network, and then implement or provide guidance of how to best collect biodiversity information change so that we can inform policy accurately. So what we're showing here is a schematic within Colombia. We have several sites where biodiversity monitoring can be taking place across different types of, using different types of biodiversity technologies and different types of information. And through a process of data collection, coordination, and data infrastructure, as well as standardization and using harmonized methods and strong communication, we're able to develop the biodiversity observation networks within a national level and at the national scale. So the second big facet of what GeoBond does is developing essential biodiversity variables. So this is the general schematic workflow of how, or the importance of an essential biodiversity variable is. So on the left, you have raw biodiversity observations, where we're collecting information on biodiversity from genetic all the way to Earth observations. And then it goes in through, it has a scalability that has to do with time and space. So we know where it came from in time and in space. And these are developed for different types of species. So this is through sort of an abstract layer, but we call this the data cube of EBVs. And then from there, we are able to develop indicators, which then can tell us how biodiversity is changing over time. We have a number of essential biodiversity variables developed. As you can see on the screen, we have genetic composition, species population, ecosystem structure, etc. And this is an evolving process, and they're always under development. And we try to adapt them where they're needed most. But now that we have these two elements, what is missing is linking this national scale monitoring with essential biodiversity information that is telling us how biodiversity is changing. So what Bond in a Box is expected to do and will produce is a toolbox to support bond development. So what we're showing in the schematic is on the left, sites where biodiversity data collection is happening, either at a local scale or a regional scale, paired with also database information like in OBIS and GBIF, and using data algorithms and models, we're able to develop essential biodiversity variables that may serve one or many of the indicators of the goals in the GBF. So once we have information on the progress on the goals and the targets of the GBF, that traditionally goes into a national report, and that is fed into the CBD for a global stocktake on biodiversity change. But what Bond in a Box is offering is that if there is high level of uncertainty in the EBVs that are developed, we are able to go back and provide guidance on where to produce and conduct additional sampling and maybe gather more information so that we can be certain and improve our biodiversity monitoring and also our progress towards the GBF. So Bond in a Box is not just a toolkit, it's a service. So we're providing a service of support to everyone that is engaged in this workflow, from data collection all the way up to policy support. So with that, I will hand it over to Jean-Michel, who will talk about the functionalities and more of the details of Bond in a Box.
Bonjour à tous. Hi, everyone. As mentioned, I am developer and also project coordinator for Bond in a Box, and I'll walk you through the platform and with this sneak peek under the hood for the more technical view. But I'll try to keep this mainly at a functional and let's say user level. So first of all, what we had already, Bond in a Box has a certain years in the making already. It had wide ambitions, but started with this first step, which is a catalog of tools. These tools are either online platforms that are listed there, or there can be qualitative books, for instance. So basically, these tools are quite static, and what we will bring with the new version of Bond in a Box is something a bit more dynamic. We will have an open access platform to provide visibility to biodiversity monitoring projects. So that's a bit like what we had for the tools, but for projects. But furthermore, we'll have a toolbox to calculate EBVs and indicators. And you'll hear me speak of pipelines a lot in this presentation. These pipelines that we create calculate basically anything, but since we are in the context of biodiversity and the GBF framework, we'll talk about EBVs and indicators. We want to support the use of models to infer change where data is lacking, and we want to guide the design of a monitoring network. We'll see these more in detail in a few minutes. But first, we'll look at a small video here that introduces the big picture. Let me just make sure that my sound is shared. There you go.
Around the world, communities are working to slow the accelerating loss of species. They have questions. Where to go sample? How to analyze the data? Which variables or indicators are relevant? Biodiversity loss is a global and a local problem. It is vital to share tools and connect scientists across borders. Bond in a Box is built with a search engine to find conservation and monitoring projects, and contains a platform for scientists to share their EBV and indicator pipelines, make it easier to share ground experience as well as code. It allows scientists to enhance tools for their specific area of study and benefit from the others' work. Bond in a Box was developed by experts from the Biodiversity Observation Network's part of the Group on Earth Observations, to increase capacity for biodiversity observations around the globe. The goal is to make it easier to ramp up new bonds and help existing bonds get better. More accurate data and easier analysis leads to better conservation decisions. Rose, for example, is an ornithologist from North America studying migratory birds. Pablo is an ecologist from Latin America working with the local government. They want to work together to design a long-term monitoring system to protect bird species that winter in the South American wetlands. They search for similar projects in Bond in a Box to create a network with people from other regions. They review the existing data and run the indicators from the available pipelines. Then, they customize the pipelines to better fit their new tracking program. To design it, they have used the sampling optimization from Bond in a Box to select sampling sites. Local initiatives share back their data with the global project. Data from the new sampling sites enhances the model, allowing to refine even further the choice of sampling sites, and so on. In addition to publishing a paper, they have created a repeatable process to inform with the progress every year. In the end, Pablo and Rose established agreements for better preservation of wetlands with local governments. Furthermore, their methodology was replicated around the world. They shared expertise through the search engine and openly shared code. Bond in a Box, improving capacity for biodiversity conservation.
Oops. Okay, sorry, I had a little quirk with my presentation. Okay, so what this video presents is the second version of Bond in a Box that we are currently working on, thanks to this funding by Microsoft. We have two teams in Quebec and Colombia working on various aspects of this project, and the first one on the left being the search engine to connect people and make monitoring projects findable. It's a bit like the tools, it's an extension of it. We also calculate EBVs. We calculate indicators using these EBVs. And this optimization of sampling to fill data gaps, we'll take a look at the iterative cycle it represents. Okay, so we have this search engine, and we have in our network in the marine world, there is Ocean Info Hub, which is a search portal for marine-related projects, vessels, data sets. They have aggregated a lot of things there through standard web protocols, and they have an architecture that we'll be reusing for expanding this system to terrestrial as well as marine. Cool thing, it's interoperable, so we'll inherit from all the projects that they already have in the marine world, and we'll be adding our own terrestrial projects there. Anyone can use this search engine. It's not reserved for GeoBond members. Someone who is working on a project, setting up a project especially, and wanting to find similar projects that happened around the world to get some of their expertise and chat with these people who faced similar problems in similar ecosystems or with similar animals. They can use the search engine to find other projects. These projects can be added by any GeoBond members through their GeoBond account. And we can also aggregate the projects that were added to Ocean Data Information System that are visible through the Ocean Info Hub portal. And as well, if there are some organizations that have large databases, we can connect directly to their database of projects through this, again, the standard schema.org web protocols. This also means that the metadata we are publishing on our website from the projects the members put in can be found with your favorite search engine, may it be Bing, Google, Yahoo. You can find it because it's going to be described with standard web metadata. And if we take a look at the project in particular, you can see that while John Doe is a very well-known scientist, famous all over the world, and that he has a Lorem Ipsum project also. So this is placeholder text. But you can see we can have an abstract, the location of the project, the EBVs, the scale, and most important, I think, is also that we have the associated people here, and you can contact them if you want more information to set up a similar project. Reports is also interesting. We have an example here in Quebec of a similar kind of platform where often people use this platform only to find the reports that, yeah, this organization made a report over that, and they go through the system just to find the report. So it's also an interesting piece. Moving to another part of the project, we are also have this pipeline engine to calculate indicators, but there are a few challenges in doing the indicator calculations. Many labs have bits and parts of these calculations, bias corrections or data manipulations, but they all use their programming language, their data standards. So it's not necessarily easy for someone who would like to take from different labs, the best of different labs, to actually make his own pipeline. And you have to contact all these people individually. It's also hard to audit results. Open access is not at the same level everywhere. Sometimes you have to contact the scientists. You don't always get a reply. If you want to look, how did you get to that indicator? How did you get to that map? Can I see the code? Can I have the source data? It's a problem. Also, it's not because it works well in a country one way that it will work like this in every country. Maybe the connectivity has to be calculated in a different way because you are not in the desert or some place with a lot of rivers or whatever. You have to take that into account, and you might want to change the calculations instead of taking a global map that you cannot really customize the way it was calculated. Something else that's a problem is data sovereignty. So the countries don't always want to share their data for very good reasons. Protection of endangered species is against poaching is one of the well-known reasons not to share these kind of biological data. So these pipelines usually have a part of data acquisition, a part of cleanup, and then running a model. And on the right, we can see that it produces two maps. So in the ideal world, every pipeline would produce an uncertainty that is mapped. So an uncertainty that varies according to the location. What's crucial about that is that, let's say you want to create a new biodiversity observation network, you will probably want to go sample where the uncertainty is the highest for a certain variable if you want to have indicators that are more reliable. How can we reduce that uncertainty in a certain location? So uncertainty speaks as much as the actual result, and sometimes even more. This is a schematic pipeline. You can imagine what you want. As one person of our team likes to say, you could calculate your income tax with this. But here, let's say it's an EBV model, so or an indicator pipeline, and you run a model based on transformed data. That's great. So what we have chosen to do to allow run model A to be ran in Julia and the transformation of data in R and getting the data in Python is that instead of calling directly each other, they produce a file. So getData produces a file that is consumed by the transformation of data. And we have a broker, a pipeline engine that moves from one script to another. And some of these things can happen in parallel. That allows us also to easily do this. So we just replaced model A by model B, and we are leveraging the whole pipeline except the model at the end. And we can even do something like this with a consensus at the end. So let's say model A and model B give slightly different results. The consensus will give us an EBV, for example, with lesser uncertainty. There is one pipeline that is particularly dear to us and that we will more actively support is the one to create a new biodiversity observation network or to enhance them. So I won't go too much in details, but basically we have to meet the partner or the organization that wants to create or enhance his bond. And then we weight different criteria. And based on these criteria, we will output a priority map that shows where for them it's more important to sample based on these criteria. And then we have an algorithm that does weighted distribution, and that gives points. For example, here it's a distribution in Quebec, and you can see that the north is not well represented, and probably in these parameters that were given, accessibility of the region to sample was important, and therefore the inaccessible part at the north was neglected. So it's an example of how criteria can influence the result. We are providing a toolbox, and it's a toolbox that we're not, it's not GeoBond developing the whole thing, right? We have collaborators all over the world that have developed indicator pipelines, and we don't want to reinvent the wheels. And people who are the experts in these fields should be the one contributing the pipeline to Bond in a Box. And then this allows them to share and to have many organizations use what they created. It also gives a tool to user to calculate EBVs or indicator and the word tool here is important. We don't give the indicator, we don't give the EBV, we give the tool to calculate it. And it seamlessly connects, as I said, R, Julia, Python through this modular pipeline approach. Under the hood, just before we go under the hood, well, why not looking at it a bit? This is a real pipeline. It's not a schematic version. This calculates a species distribution model. So you can see things are linked together. There are some constant values here. There are some user inputs that are here listed on the right. And basically, whatever you don't specify as a constant, it's going to be a user input that you can run. Oops, I thought I had it open, but let's say here, so you can fill this this form, and it will give the outputs to the pipeline, and then you run this, and it calculates what it has to calculate. And what I want to show with that is a bit of live demo of what we can do with the modular pipeline approach. So you see that the pipeline is quite large. There's lots of things happening, but in the end, if we say maxent is not the algorithm we want, and we go here in the SDM folder, and there is BART, which is another algorithm, we can see a small description, the references that were used to do this, and we can even click and see the code. We land directly in GitHub into code. So this is where we say we want transparency. You can audit what is happening. You can take a look at the code. You can take a look at the references, and you can take a look at the results of each of these individual steps. So the select background approach, for instance, you can take a look at the table of background points. And then if I say I don't want maxent, I remove it, I put BART instead. Of course, this has been written and described by some scientists and contributed in the pipeline. How do you put this box in there to be available for others is the topic for another webinar that we'll have on the collaboration of new indicators. So right now, if I run this, I'm just going to double click to add an output, and we could run, providing we give these parameters, and we have another algorithm running instead. This is just an example of the prioritization. So the results that you saw, we could see, as I said, like the result of each individual step. This is what we call the debug UI, so you can see everything, and eventually we can send this for a report to another API. I just lost. Where am I? Okay, here we go. So this is the map you saw, and you can see that you can audit every intermediate result that was there. So this is the map that will load eventually. And you can take a look at every other intermediate step. I had the question this morning, so I'll go forward to answer it already. So once you fill this, you can have results of any kind. What I mean by any kind is maps, TIFFs, but basically the outputs are a MIME type. So any file of any type can be, as long as it can be outputted by a script and digested by another one, a file is a valid output. So we have tables like CSVs, TSVs, and JPEGs, PNGs are also a valid type of output. Under the hood, and I won't go into details, but just to say, we have the stack catalog approach. You can use any stack catalog that houses cloud optimized GeoTIFFs, which is really, really cool because it allows you to take only the part that you need for calculating without downloading gigabytes of data. You just get a few megabytes locally, you make the calculation, and we use the same thing for visualization. So if you want to visualize a layer that's global and that is very heavy, but you just want to look at a small section, you don't have to download everything. We use scripting languages. We can add new ones easily. And API calls, that's quite important for interoperability. For example, we could have an API call to, well, we use, for instance, the planetary computer for getting the GBIF data. We have talked with Galaxy for ecology to call their EBV pipelines as well through API calls. And the Dockerized infrastructure is important because it allows portability. And who says portability says that I can run this on my own computer, on any server, which means that some country who doesn't want to share his data can have the best guarantee in the world, being you can run it on your own server and be sure that you control what's happening. You don't have to make it public to everybody if you want to use your own data. And this is the technology stack that's running it. And upcoming, very important for that part, because schema.org is central to the search portal, right, that we saw in the first place. But it's also very, very important here because it will allow us to search for our scripts, search for our pipelines. And the people from Ocean Data Information System might as well use this to search for things that are in our pipelines and scripts. So these challenges that we saw in the first place, how can we help collaborations across labs and programming languages so we communicate through inputs and outputs? We know it's hard to audit results in many cases, so in our platform, the results are visible for each intermediate steps, and the documentation, code, and references are public. It can be customized, so there's different level of customization. Very expert user can say, I go in the pipeline, I change things, I add in my own scripts, and that's great. Second level of technicality that's a bit easier would be I take an existing pipeline, I parameterize it, I run it. So a country or organization that has some in-house experts, but that are not necessarily willing to go and play in the pipeline, they can use community validated pipelines. And the third level of customization would be to contact Geobon to ask for the service to help them with these pipelines if you don't have the in-house expertise. And data sovereignty, well, it can be self-hosted thanks to the Docker technology. Here are the list of initial pipelines we have for the launch. I think it's important to say it was the list we have voted before the GBF was voted. And we more than welcome GBF related indicators in the upcoming weeks and months to be added in there. So as a summary, what can it do and what it cannot do? So it is a search portal for biodiversity projects and tool, but it is not an alternative to a fully fledged search engine. We are really searching for biodiversity things, and our link data will augment their search, and that's great. A toolbox for organizations to calculate their own indicators and not providing global ready-made indicators. It is also a sampling site suggestion tool to be used in collaboration with Geobon, and it is not enforcing any bond structure. So what you have in the end, as a result of the algorithm, the points you have there is merely a suggestion, and often they'll have to play around the points to find a really suitable within a few kilometers range that is around the designated point. We have been speaking with the Quebec Bond about that, and it's what they had to do themselves when they set up initially. They had selected sites, and when they landed there, well, it wasn't what they expected, and they had to look around. So we know the reality is always trickier. And it's not leaving you alone to configure the weights, which is very technical. So we want to provide a service for that to the organizations that need it. I think it's good to take a step back and say that we're not the only one doing these kind of things, and compare with some other platforms. There are many more, but the slide is not so large. So I took the two main ones we had in mind. What I put in yellow in parentheses is that it's something can be done with that platform, but it's not our specialty. For example, we can show layers in this UI I showed you a few minutes ago, and we can show pre-calculated variables and indicators, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to allow countries, organizations to customize, use their local data, to self-host if they want, and be very, very transparent all the way through. Whereas other platforms are really cool to show pre-calculated things, but do not allow for any kind of customization. So I'll hand over now to Katie.
Yeah, thanks, Jean-Michel.
Thank you,
That was really great. I hope it wasn't too technical, but I hope that it gains your interest and, you know, other people that might be interested to learn more about it, because GeoBond will be rolling this out, and we really want to roll this out as a support service. So we don't, like as Jean-Michel said, we're not enforcing anything, we're not black boxing anything, and we're not leaving you to, you know, drown in the technical details. We hope to have a support service that can help you overcome any issues you might have. And of course, the success of the platform will depend on you and the community that helps us build it. So if there's something that you want to see in Bond in a Box, is there a particular indicator you would like to incorporate? Do you have tools that you want or you think would help optimize bond locations? These are all things that we want to know and we can incorporate into Bond in a Box. So we have just a quick poll, again, using the Mentimeter chat. If you can just tell us how you would like to get involved, whether it's by being a contributor, a user, or both. So quickly, if you can just go to menti.com and put in the code 26885701, or I think, hey, John, if you can drop the link again in the chat, that might help. Because we really want to know if we have a lot of people that want to contribute, how can we structure Bond in a Box in that sense to incorporate your needs? And also, if you see yourself as a user, we want to know what you need so we can contact our contributors and incorporate these things. So this is a community of practice that we want to build, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs of everyone. So it looks like a lot of both. Okay, so we might have some people in our next webinar. So I'll leave that open if you just want to contribute quickly. Jean-Michel, do you want to put the slides back up again, please?
Yes.
And so lastly, to let you know, what are the next steps for Bond in a Box? The first thing that we're going to have is another webinar, and this one will be about the indicator pipeline. So these will be more for our contributor people that are very much interested in learning how they can contribute their indicator code to Bond in a Box so that others can benefit. This will be a more technical webinar. It will focus on how the pipeline engine works, creating a description file, building pipelines, the stack catalog, the approach that Jean-Michel mentioned. And of course, a very strong open discussion about data standardization and data sources, data sovereignty, security, all those things that are critical to this to operate and be trusted. We haven't figured out the exact dates yet, so we'll keep you posted, and it will be online. So keep an eye out for messages on that. And the next thing that we will be doing is, if you don't already know, GeoBond has a global conference planned for the fall. Next slide, Jean-Michel. From the 12th to the 13th in October in person in Montreal. So we will have a formal launch of Bond in a Box at the conference. So again, this is for everyone that wants to contribute, use Bond in a Box at any level. We will have throughout the whole conference an engagement process with people that they want to contribute a project to Bond in a Box, if they want to engage with contributors or also our partners. We'll have a booth there to collect all this information from you. And of course, we'll have some online tools that if you can't join us in person, we'll make sure that you can also engage in Bond in a Box. So again, the conference launch, the Bond in a Box will be launched at the conference, which is October 10th to the 13th in Montreal. So next slide, I think, is the last one. So yes, again, thank you very much. Here is our shameless plug for our conference. I think Adriana put something in the chat. Our registration is opening, I think, today. And the abstract deadline is tomorrow. So please, if you're interested, if you're not aware about, share that. Time is ticking for that one. So now I think we'll open up the floor to questions or discussion. Adriana, do you want to have any closing remarks or?
Yes, well, thank you for being here, all of you. I know we are a bit behind our own schedule. As you know, this Zoom call is run as a conference call rather than a webinar, so you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and ask questions and or provide feedback or just share ideas with the team so they can take notes and incorporate your feedback. So who would like to start? Alicia.
Hi. So you mentioned that you developed this, or that's what I understood, hand in hand with potential users. If so, I was wondering if you have already like a use case where, like, from beginning to end, with users that are not or that were not involved in developing it. Yeah, so that's my question. If you already have.
Thank you. So no, we currently have only the people who were involved in the inception and that were with us through the project that have been involved. But we look forward to have other contributors. For example, the pipelines of indicators mostly come from Humboldt Institute. They already had code there, so they'll be sharing these pipelines. So we're looking forward for other contributors from our network or beyond to share pipelines. And for the bond optimizations, it's currently also only Quebec and Colombia that have been participating. Those who we call the proof of concept regions for this project.
Okay, and I forgot to ask those people that ask questions to introduce themselves, because we are a community, the GeoBond community, we know each other, or at least a core group, we know each other. So we forgot that there are other people that maybe are not familiar with GeoBond. So Frank.
Hi, Adriana and Katie and everybody. Thank you for the update. I'm Frank Miller-Carger at the University of South Florida. I'm an oceanographer. And I've followed the Bond in a Box development over the years. One of the things that I think Bond in a Box is really important is guidelines on establishing a bond, basically. We didn't talk a lot about that today. But one of the things that I've found over the years that we may establish a bond anywhere or thematically, and yet the difficulty is that even the conventions, like the Convention on Biological Diversity, is not explicit about any of these indicators or EBVs or whatever we want to call them, need to be based on observations, on raw observations, and that there has to be a level of interoperability in that. So that there's several layers here that we didn't talk about, which were part of the intended role of Bond in a Box to begin with, is to to provide an explanation of benefits of why we need these observations, why we need to collect them in a standardized fashion, and why interoperability is important, and how do you share at least a minimum of observations, because that's still a cultural block in our community. So I think that as we revisit Bond in a Box, that these very fundamental principles of why we are doing this to begin with should be included in the process.
Thank you, Frank. Well noted.
Yeah,
Yes,
I just
Katie.
want to add to, I think, Jean-Michel, we talked about this, but having a sort of a bond development guidance manual to touch on these exact reasons, Frank, like I can't agree more. And just to let you know, we're aware of it. It's a multifaceted, topic that you have to do everything carefully, and it's definitely something that we are aware of. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, and as I mentioned, sometimes uncertainty is valuable even more than the result in order to choose where you will go sample. And that's the kind of things that guided us in this second phase of the project.
Okay, thank you. Now, Christian Langer.
Yeah, hello, here's Christian from IDEF in Leipzig. Thanks for the demo from the box. It was really interesting. And I have a question about the pipeline to create indicators. So is the result always just an indicator, or can the pipeline also output other things like, for instance, Excel data tables or just images like PNGs or JPEGs?
Yes, I haven't went through a full demo. We have, for example, the SHI pipeline that outputs a graph, which is a JPEG. And basically any MIME type, when this is a topic for the next webinar, but when you describe a step, you describe the type of every input and output. So there's like fundamental types like numbers, and you can also put a MIME type. So basically any file type is supported as an output.
Yeah, it would be helpful to show maybe a really simple demo of the pipeline to create some indicator. But maybe not now, but maybe for the future.
I can run an SHI while we speak if you want, and show you the result after. But yes, so it can produce any kind of outputs to any file type, basically.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Christian. Anybody else? You can ask questions or just share some ideas. And I know some of you are familiar with Bond in a Box. Some of you maybe contributed to the first phase of Bond in a Box, so you are very familiar. Maybe some of you are very technical, you are writing code, but I'm pretty sure some of you are not that technical and maybe you have different questions. And we would like to hear from you, how would Bond in a Box help you, or what does it need to have more to help you in your work? And I see Susanna. You are muted, Susanna.
My name is Susana Rodriguez. I'm a researcher at Humboldt Institute. And I just want to ask regarding the intended audience for Bond in a Box, in a sense that in the presentation you presented something that seems to be thought something very open for everybody, but at the same time you said it's not necessarily a platform for governments to calculate their indicators. So I wonder if you can specify a little bit what is the audience that you are targeting with it, and more than that, what is the technical ability that, for example, I'm thinking in a local authority will have to have to profit much better from the tools. And if there is something written for new users regarding that specificities.
Do you want to go, Katie? There were lots of questions in that question.
Yeah, well, I can start. I think the use is a very good question. And because we have a diverse set of users and people coming in with different expectations and levels of, technical understanding, and we want to make it usable by anyone that needs data to report at the national level. So if someone has a mandate from their national government to report on the state of freshwater biodiversity, then we should have a location where they can find this information. And so we fully recognize that some countries have different capacities. They have maybe one person in their Minister of the Environmental Office. So we want to have, it can be a place for these people to come and find information, but also if they don't know where to start, then we might be able to provide local guidance for the people in their country of who to talk to. So it's really a spectrum. I think GeoBond right now has a close relationship with the CBD, and so reporting on targets, part of the GBF, I think was the original and tangible element. But I think what we really want to do more is incorporate more local and community-based observations, and something we've talked about. But what's really missing is maybe IPLC data, but just more local information that gets collected, but it's just unseen. So we want to be able to reach out to those types of people and make their information and knowledge more useful and findable.
And I will add that we want to write some guide as well for people who want to use this or contribute. Right now, there's only some GitHub documentation about how to use the system, but we want to write a more formal guide to help organizations jump in. And it goes from the ability of the organization. So an organization with a lot of in-house expertise who can write his own pipelines would be able to just take the system, put it on his server, and play with the scripts and steps and add new things in. But if that's not the case in some country, but they still have some kind of expertise. Let's say they understand the concept of an indicator well enough with their local experts. Well, they could go through without modifying the pipeline. Here, for example, is the parameters. So they would say, okay, I know this species has this min forest, this max forest that it can live in. You click run. This is what I just started when Christian was asking me, and then you can get, for example, the time series of habitat raster, some table, and then if you want to look at it on a graph, you have here a graph for the connectivity score is in red, habitat score is in green, and habitat index here is in blue. So, and someone who knows these things could work on it himself without going that deep in the pipeline. And there's the third level where it's more like we don't have anybody who's able to do this, and really we need GeoBond to help us with these things. So there's I see three levels of let's say technical involvement for someone who would like to use the system. Does that answer your question, Susanna?
I would also ask this back to the audience. If there is anybody in the audience that actually is directly involved, I mean, works for a government and is directly involved in national reporting, we would like to hear from them on what kind of tools would they need. But I'm not sure if there's anybody left that's actually working for a government. I think I saw a few names earlier, but it probably had to go. Susanna.
Well, if nobody has another question, I would love to ask another one. And let's imagine this works perfectly, and like all the organizations doing field work and doing local work are able to use the tool, upload the data, work with lines and everything. How, or if you thought about how can the tool promote the fact that you need at a certain scale to join data together? I mean, I can do the exercise to look for who is working in my area and try to connect with them, but then there will be a process of kind of facilitating the fact that different organizations might want to join forces in terms of raw data and do the whole process again. So the way I see it, the way I understand it, the tool right now allows you to detect those organizations that might be useful for you and you can join forces with. But it was not clear if the tool itself also promotes joining data and joining forces in terms of using the pipeline and tools to check like quality controls and all those that might be before starting using your data.
I was going to give it to you, Michelle.
Go ahead, and I'll complete.
Well, I think the main answer there is through the pipelines themselves. So they'll connect that data. So if the data exists, it should be able to be incorporated into the pipelines.
But we all know that data sanitization and standardization is a maze in itself, and the platform again is a toolbox. So it's only as powerful as the tools that are in the toolbox. So if there are steps, for example, we have steps to clean GBIF data. Well, someone from Biodiversity Quebec coded a step to clean GBIF data, put that in, it's available to others. But if you need to have something very specific for the particular data your organization is handling, then you will probably need to add your own step for the data standardization if it doesn't fit in whatever other steps that are available. We know data can get really complicated for that kind of things.
Mm-hmm. And I guess my following question is: so the tool to detect communities or to detect organizations will fit itself. So if I go through the pipeline, I use a tool, and then I have a result, then the engine that looks for organizations close to me will able to tell me that I already went through that process, and in that way kind of enhance collaboration with locals or actors that are advancing the process. So it's a positive feedback on the engine to look for organizations?
This is very interesting. It's not something we, if I understand correctly. So what you mean is, for example, an organization uses our tool to design a sampling scheme.
Yes.
And in the end, based on the parameters that you have inputted, we could say that similar organizations are working on this similar kind of ecosystems, for example, and link you to these. It's something that we have conceptualized, but it's not something that we are currently implementing. Okay. What we have for the project search is mostly, once this rolls out, we'll send an email to all our 2,500 members or so to say, put your projects in there. And then we already have some 600-700 projects from Colombia. We'll probably add a few projects from Quebec. And then we will be able to have this community of projects. We'll also add all the projects from the marine community, from Ocean Info Hub will also be contributed because the system is interoperable with Ocean Info Hub. So there'll be some we hope we'll have a critic mass of projects so that the tool is useful only a few weeks or months after the launch to find similar projects. But it's not yet planned to use the pipeline results to feed the search engine. But that's a very good idea. We hadn't had this concept, but
Cool. Thanks.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Any other questions? And please think of yourselves as our contact points within your organization or within your network, so you can carry this discussion over to your network, as Jessica was mentioning in the chat, and then you can send us feedback later. You can ask questions. Don't be afraid of asking questions. There are no stupid questions that that you can ask here. We are here to improve the platform so that we can have a product that can actually be helpful for a lot of people. And now I see Christian again.
Yeah, maybe I have a last question, so maybe it's already answered, but so is there then the possibility to give the tools a certain license, or are the tools which I have uploaded or which I will upload in future then all CC0? And my second question, so the public license CC, no, not CC0, CC0, sorry. And the second answer, during the time when I built the members page for GeoBon, I focus only for registering members. And in the past, there were often requests for institutions to register as well. I have the same now in EuropaBon, the same requests. My question here is then, or not my question, maybe my advice would be, it would be cool that maybe not members can upload tools, so that also there's a process maybe for institutions. Let's say IDEF register in Bon in the Box and upload tools, but it is then so IDEF is a member, like the institution or like GBIF register in Bon in the Box or in the members page, and the tools are uploaded via GBIF or via IDEF, not via Christian Langer, which works in IDEF. So maybe this can be could be a nice feature. Similar when I upload tools to GBIF via the IPT, I register. So an institution is then registered for this tool.
Yes, very pertinent questions. The license first, the part about the license. So right now, currently, because we're only working with our internal scripts, we have just a CC0 for everything. But the license could be a field of the description file that you provide to when you, again, topic for the next webinar, but when you contribute some indicator code or some script, you have a description file, and in this you give the reference to papers, things like that, and license would be one of the fields there that is not yet in there, but that will be added eventually, yes. So this is for license and organization to upload. So I'm going to get technical, sorry for those who aren't, but we'll be using schema.org project schema, which involves a metadata provider, for example, Christian Langer, who provided the data. It involves, you can put people who are related to the project, and you can put organizations that are related to the projects. So these fields will be there, but there will still be, in the current design, there will still be a member, a person who creates the tool, for instance, but who would add in the fields of the metadata, who would add IDIV, for instance, in there. So when you use the search portal, you could search IDIV, and you would find the tools that were that are related to IDIV in a way or another. So it's not exactly created by an organization, but it's still related and searchable by organization. So we will have a table in the database for organizations, but it will be a byproduct of the projects and not a direct membership.
I just had a question on related that what about like so museum data or something? It's a museum that is now digitizing information. We're not taking, has there, we don't think this has ever been discussed, but like trait data or something where a user can measure or something. Again, this is coming from an institution, but all of the resources that museums have available, is this searchable by Bond in a Box?
So not in this phase. If you look at what is going on in Ocean Info Hub, they are indexing databases and things like that. So once the engine of Ocean Info Hub is up and running for projects, we'll be able to extend to other types. But this needs a fair amount of involvement from the museum and GeoBond together, so to make things connect, right? So the way they work in Ocean Info Hub is that they have partner organizations, and they teach these partner organizations how to describe with metadata, how to describe their data sets, their projects, their people, whatever they have to provide. And they work together to connect things. And once it's established, once it's connected, then it lives by itself. So there's a whole mesh of interconnected information that lives in the ODIS, actually, Ocean Data Information System. It's like a virtual mesh of data that we can search, and that lives by itself. So Ocean Info Hub is one way to access it, and Bond in a Box will have a view, or a very limited view, over projects in this huge mesh. And eventually we can, since they have already developed it, we'll just expand this to tools and data. But that's really future steps that we could take.
Right, yeah.
Okay, any other question? If not, we can maybe finish this session here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, for staying until now. And as I mentioned before, if you have any other questions, if you have any other ideas, please contact us, Katie or Jean-Michel or myself. And we will definitely be more than happy to include this feedback in our next steps. So I took some notes, and definitely we will have an updated manual with guidelines for establishing bonds, which was what Frank mentioned. There is an existing draft that we need to update in view of recent developments on the biodiversity landscape. So we plan to have that by the conference date, which is 10 to 13 of October, so that anybody can have an idea, anybody from maybe outside of GeoBond that do not know what a biodiversity observation network is and how to set it up, so they would know that when they join us in Montreal. And we will announce, we will open the registration page today after this meeting, and then we will probably just extend the abstract submission deadline with a few days in view of the registration fees coming out. So thank you again for being here. Please tell your colleagues to join the session this evening. And if not, we will send you another email when the new webinar or the next webinar will be set, probably in a few months. And yes, thank you again for being here, and thank you for all your support.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.